At the Dallas Petroleum Club, the night glowed like gold beneath crystal chandeliers. Glasses clicked. Laughter rang like knives. Ryan Pierce raised his glass, smirking. "So how does it feel, being a loser living off your wife?" The whole table burst out laughing, and the loudest laugh came from my wife. I sat still, letting each wave of laughter tear at my pride. 30 seconds felt like 30 years of marriage. I used to think I could endure it. But the moment she threw her head back and laughed with them, something in me snapped. I set my glass down and stood slowly. The scrape of my chair across the wood floor hushed the room. I adjusted my tie and locked eyes with CEO Thomas Reed. My voice came low and even, like a gavel striking. "Tomorrow you'll be out of that chair, because this loser owns 90% of Atlas Dynamics." The air froze. They held their breath. And me, I finally started telling the real story. The Dallas Petroleum Club glittered like a cathedral built for power. Chandeliers spilled gold light across white linen tables, where silverware gleamed and laughter carried on currents of champagne. Waiters in pressed tuxedos moved like shadows, topping glasses, pretending not to hear the jokes that cut deeper than knives. I sat at the edge of it all, the supposed +1, with a glass of whiskey sweating in my hand. The first sip burned, oak, smoke, and bitterness, and I let it sit on my tongue longer than it deserved. Around me, conversations rose and fell like waves. Stock tips traded in whispers, business deals wrapped in casual jokes. Across the room, Lauren shone in her emerald gown, head tilted back in laughter that didn't belong to me anymore. It was a world of quarterly earnings, not loyalty, of handshakes, not vows. I swirled the amber in my glass and felt its weight. The whiskey was bitter, but not nearly as bitter as watching my own wife laugh at my expense. Ryan Pierce spotted me from across the circle and lifted his glass like we were old friends. "Michael, get over here, buddy," he called, his voice just loud enough to draw a few extra eyes. I forced a thin smile and stepped closer, Lauren's hand sliding onto my arm, her polished corporate wife look locked in place. Ryan's grin was all teeth, the kind that said he'd never been told no in his life. He leaned toward me, champagne swirling in his glass. "Must be nice," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to overhear, "having your very own sugar mama." The group erupted in easy laughter, the kind that feeds on someone else's humiliation. Even Thomas Reed, the CEO, gave a polite chuckle, though his eyes flickered with discomfort. Lauren didn't flinch. She laughed right along with them, the sound sharp and practiced. That was the first cut. And Ryan, like any predator who smelled blood, had no intention of stopping there. Ryan tilted his glass again, eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "I mean, seriously, Mike," he said, voice pitched louder so more people could enjoy the spectacle. "What do you even do all day while Lauren's out here killing it in the business world? Netflix marathons? Maybe a little Xbox?" The laughter came harder this time, rolling over me in waves. Executives leaned in, grins wide, eager to share in the joke. A couple at the next table even glanced over, curious about the entertainment. And then came the sound that sliced deeper than anything Ryan could have said. Lauren's laugh. Not nervous, not forced, genuine. The kind that crinkled her eyes and made her throw her head back just a little too far. It was the same laugh she'd once given me in quieter days, when we were still on the same side. Now it cut like a blade, a reminder that somewhere along the climb, I'd become expendable in her story. I kept my face neutral, the same mask I'd worn at 100 of these dinners. My fingers tightened around the heavy-bottomed glass, the whiskey inside trembling just enough to betray what I wouldn't show on my face. Every instinct screamed to snap back, to put Ryan in his place, but I forced the anger down, burying it beneath a steady breath. Silence became my shield. Let them laugh. Let them believe I was too small to matter. The more they mocked, the more invisible I appeared, and invisibility has its uses. I lifted the glass, letting the burn of oak and smoke scorch its way down my throat, as if I could swallow their contempt along with it. On the outside, I looked like the easygoing husband, too mild to care. Inside, something colder was taking shape, steady as steel. They mistook my restraint for weakness, but I was already counting the seconds until the laughter would die in their throats. Ryan swirled the champagne in his glass, his grin widening like he'd just discovered a new toy. He raised his voice another notch, making sure the surrounding tables caught every word. Come on, Mike, let's be real. While Lauren's out closing deals and making partner tracks, you're at home. What? Netflix binges? Afternoon naps? Professional loser? Am I right? The laughter exploded, bigger this time, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings like applause for a cruel performance. Forks paused mid-air, heads turned, strangers smiling at my expense as if humiliation were a party trick. Thomas Reed shifted uncomfortably, offering a polite cough as if to redirect, but Ryan waved him off. He wasn't done. This was sport now, and I was the prey. Lauren's hand tightened on my arm, but when I glanced at her, there was no outrage on my behalf, just that polished smile, the one that told the room she was in on the joke. That cut deeper than anything Ryan had said. Lauren's manicured fingers pressed tighter into my arm, a gesture that to anyone watching might have looked affectionate. But her smile never broke. Her laugh slipped right in with the others, sharp and unhesitating, like she was part of the chorus. That was the moment I felt something fracture inside me. Ryan leaned closer, sensing he had the crowd hooked. "Let's stop pretending," he said, voice cutting through the chatter. "What's it really like, Mike, being a loser? Living off your wife's paycheck while the rest of us actually earn our seats at this table?" The laughter roared, fuller, uglier, as if the room itself was joining in. My jaw tightened, but I stayed still. Silence can be heavier than shouting. I looked down at the whiskey, its surface trembling in the glass, and realized it wasn't the drink shaking. It was me, holding back 15 years of patience, 15 years of letting others decide who I was. I drew in a slow breath and let it out steady, as if I were cooling steel in a forge. My shoulders rolled back, loosening the weight I'd been carrying all night. Then I straightened, one deliberate movement at a time, and adjusted my tie. It was a small gesture, but it caught like a spark in dry timber. The laughter stumbled, thinning out as eyes turned toward me. I didn't glare, didn't raise my voice. I simply stood taller, calm as a man who had nothing left to lose, and everything to reveal. The air around the table seemed to shift, that invisible pressure before a storm breaks. Forks rested, glasses stilled. Ryan's grin faltered, just slightly, as if he sensed the prey wasn't playing along anymore. Inside, I felt something cold settle, sharper than rage. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. Now they were about to learn the cost of underestimating the man they thought was invisible. I let the silence thicken until even the chandeliers seemed to hum. Then my eyes locked on Thomas Reed, the CEO in his midnight suit, still clutching his glass halfway to his lips. My voice came low, even, carrying farther than a shout ever could. "You know, Thomas," I said, "from where you're standing, it must look strange." I paused, adjusted my tie once more, then leaned just enough to cut the distance. "But here's the truth. Atlas Dynamics isn't yours to run. 90% of it belongs to me." The words hit like a dropped gavel. For a heartbeat, the ballroom froze, laughter dying in throats, champagne flutes trembling in stunned hands. Reed's face drained to chalk. The practiced smirk of Ryan Pierce collapsed into open confusion. Beside me, Lauren's grip slackened, her polished smile unraveling into shock. She whispered, "What?" But I didn't look at her. My eyes stayed on Reed, steady, because the night of pretending was finally over. The room collapsed into a silence so heavy I could hear my own pulse thudding in my ears. Crystal glasses froze midair, forks hovered above plates, conversations evaporated like smoke in a sudden wind. Even the waiters halted, trays suspended, unsure whether to move or vanish. Thomas Reed stood rigid across from me, his face blanching under the golden chandeliers. The confident CEO who had strutted minutes earlier now looked like a man stripped bare. His fingers clutched the stem of his glass too tightly, knuckles white, as if letting go would make my words more real. I didn't flinch. I didn't soften the blow. I let the weight of the truth hang there, unblinking, until it pressed on every chest in the room. Then came the shatter, a wine glass slipping from Lauren's hand, exploding across the marble floor. Red spread over white linen like blood. The sound cut through the stillness, sealing the moment. There was no going back. The stem slipped from Lauren's fingers, as if her body forgot how to hold it. The glass struck the edge of the table, then burst across the linen, shards scattering like ice. Red wine bled outward, a violent bloom on pure white cloth, seeping into silver embroidery like a wound that couldn't be hidden. Heads jerked toward the sound. Whispers flared around the table, hushed and frantic, 1,000 questions buzzing beneath the glitter of chandeliers. Some leaned in, others sat frozen, eyes darting between me and Lauren as if waiting for someone to say it wasn't true. Lauren's lips parted, trembling, her voice barely above breath. "Michael, what did you just say?" Her emerald gown shimmered under the light, but her composure was gone, stripped bare like reeds. I didn't answer her. My gaze stayed locked on the executives, on the predators who thought I was prey. For the first time in 15 years, the laughter was theirs no longer. The silence belonged to me. I turned without another word, leaving the shattered glass and their stunned faces behind me. The marble floor caught every step of my shoes, each strike echoing sharp and cold through the ballroom. It wasn't hurried, it wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, the sound of a man reclaiming his name. Behind me, chairs scraped, voices rose in frantic whispers. I heard Reed's voice crack, calling after me. Lauren's sharp, panicked "Michael!" cut through the hum, but I didn't slow. For years I had been background noise, the quiet husband in the corner. Now every eye followed my exit like a spotlight I never asked for. The chandeliers glittered above, but the warmth they cast no longer touched me. I pushed open the heavy doors, and the ballroom's golden noise collapsed into the cooler hush of the Dallas Petroleum Club lobby. My heartbeat was steady now, my jaw set. Let them wonder. Let them scramble. Tonight, I was done playing invisible. The doors swung shut behind me, muting the chaos inside. The lobby of the Dallas Petroleum Club's tower stretched wide, marble polished to a mirror's shine, tourists rolling suitcases and businessmen murmuring into phones. My steps cut clean across the stone, each one lighter than the last. Then I heard it, sharp staccato clicks of heels striking too fast. "Michael, wait!" Lauren's voice sliced through the air, desperate in a way I hadn't heard in years. I didn't slow. If anything, I lengthened my stride, hands buried in my pockets. The echo of her heels closed in, scattering across the lobby like warning shots. A moment later, her fingers clamped onto my sleeve, yanking me halfway around. Her emerald gown was creased from the chase, hair slipping loose, makeup smudging at the corners of her eyes. Her breath came ragged. "What the hell do you mean you own the company?" she demanded, voice shaking between fury and fear. For the first time all night, I faced her directly. Her nails dug into my sleeve as her eyes searched mine, wild and disbelieving. "You've been unemployed for 3 years, she spat, her voice cracking loud enough for 2 bellhops to glance over. "That's what everyone thinks. That's what I thought." I let her words hang, unhurried, the way a judge lets silence weigh before a verdict. "Unemployed?" I repeated, my tone flat, almost amused. "Is that the story you've been telling yourself to make it easier?" She blinked, confusion flooding in where certainty had lived. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "While you were busy climbing their ladder, I was building a foundation they never saw coming. Orion Systems wasn't some hobby, Lauren. It was mine. And when Atlas was circling the drain, I merged them. I didn't disappear. I just stepped out of the spotlight." Her lips parted, but nothing came. For the first time in years, she realized she didn't know the man standing in front of her. I pulled my arm free, smoothing the crease her grip had left on my jacket. "Orion Systems," I said slowly, watching the name flicker across her expression like a half-forgotten dream. "The startup I built from nothing, the one you used to joke, kept me glued to a keyboard." She swallowed hard, eyes darting as if searching old memories. "When Atlas Dynamics was gasping for air, Thomas Reed came to me. He needed saving. I offered a merger. Orion didn't vanish, Lauren. It became the lifeline. And in the fine print, I kept 90% control. Full voting rights. Veto power." Her breath hitched. "But nobody knew." "Exactly," I cut in. "Because I wanted it that way. A blind trust. Documents sealed, ownership hidden. To the world, I was retired. To you, I was unemployed. And for 15 years, I let that story stand." Her lips trembled. For the first time, doubt had replaced the confidence in her eyes. Her mascara streaked as she stared at me, struggling to process the pieces I'd just dropped at her feet. I kept my voice low, steady, the way you talk when the truth can't be undone. Do you really want to know why I stayed silent? Why I let you believe I was nothing but a retired man living off scraps?" She blinked, tears gathering, but said nothing. "Because I needed to know, Lauren," I continued. "I needed to know if you loved me for who I was, not for the size of my portfolio, not for the title on a business card, just me, the man who cooks you dinner, fixes the leaky sink, stands beside you without demanding a spotlight." Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her face. "All those nights I thought I was carrying us," she whispered. I nodded once. "And all those nights I was carrying something heavier, the question of whether you'd still choose me if the money didn't exist." Lauren's shoulders began to shake, and the perfect mask she wore in boardrooms collapsed right there in the lobby. Black streaks of mascara carved lines down her cheeks, her emerald gown shimmering under the cold hotel lights as if mocking the ruin on her face. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, trying to steady her breath, but the sobs slipped through anyway. "I didn't know," she whispered, voice thin, breaking apart with each word. "I swear, Michael, I didn't know." I studied her, the woman I had loved for 15 years, the woman who just minutes ago had laughed the loudest when another man called me a loser. My jaw tightened. "You may not have known the paperwork, the mergers, the trust," I said quietly, "but tonight you knew enough. And still, you laughed." Her knees buckled slightly, hand gripping the edge of a marble column for balance. For the first time in a long time, she had no defense, and I had no patience left. Her tears blurred into black streaks, but I didn't flinch. My voice came out calm, almost too calm. "Tonight, Lauren, you laughed with them." She shook her head violently, words tumbling out in gasps. "It was awkward. I didn't mean it. I cut her off with a single look. "No excuses, not nervous laughter, not forced. You laughed, and it told me everything I needed to know." The lobby's hum carried on around us, tourists dragging suitcases, the front desk answering phones, yet it all felt distant, like we were the only two people left in the world. Lauren's hand reached out, trembling, as if to grab mine, to pull me back into the orbit I had once lived in. But I stepped away, her fingers closing on air. "For 15 years I let the world think I was invisible," I said. "But tonight, you showed me I was invisible to you too." Then I turned and walked, leaving her standing in silence. I pulled my arm free and stepped back, the polished marble under my shoes echoing louder than her sobs. For 15 years I had been the one to follow, to turn around when she called my name, to patch the silence with a steady smile, but not tonight. Tonight, for the first time, I left her standing alone. Her voice chased me, ragged and trembling. "Michael, please, just wait." But I didn't. I kept moving, each stride deliberate, the distance between us widening with every step. I reached the revolving doors, the cool night air seeping in, carrying the scent of rain on the Dallas streets. I didn't look back. Not at the smear of mascara, not at the emerald gown crumpled against the column, not at the woman who had just chosen laughter over loyalty. My chest felt heavy, but beneath it, something sharper stirred. A resolve that had been waiting too long. For once, she would know what it felt like to be left behind. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, the kind of silence that usually felt comforting after a long night. Not tonight. Tonight it felt hollow. I walked past the living room Lauren had decorated like a magazine spread, past the kitchen island where we once laughed over late-night takeout. My steps carried me straight to the office, the one room she rarely entered. She always called it my man cave, a place where I wasted hours on hobbies. She never knew the truth. I shut the door, pressed a hidden latch on the bookshelf, and the panel swung open with a muted click. Inside sat a fireproof safe, silent and patient, holding the life I'd kept hidden. My fingers spun the dial, the lock yielding with a heavy clunk. I pulled out the thick folder stamped Atlas Holdings, the parent company of Atlas Dynamics. Contracts, merger papers, ownership certificates, all of it spread across my desk like cards in a winning hand. This wasn't just paper, this was power. The smell of old paper and fresh ink pulled me back to a night 15 years earlier, when Atlas Dynamics was on life support. I remembered Thomas Reed in my office, suit damp with sweat, voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "Michael, if this merger doesn't happen, Atlas is finished. Hundreds of jobs, gone. He slid the paperwork across my desk like a gambler begging for credit at the table. I had built Orion systems brick by brick, late nights and endless code. Atlas was floundering, but I saw opportunity in its bones. So I drafted the deal. Clean, surgical, decisive. I signed away the merger and kept 90% ownership, full voting rights, and veto power over every major decision. Reed kept the title, the corner office, and the public face. I kept the company. When the ink dried, I wasn't just saving Atlas, I was owning it. And I knew someday, when the silence broke, the world would remember my name. The folder lay open across my desk, signatures and seals staring back like silent witnesses. 15 years of restraint pressed on my chest, heavier than any weight I'd carried. I leaned back in the leather chair, the quiet of the house broken only by the tick of the wall clock. Enough hiding, enough silence. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't used in years. Marcus Hale, my attorney, the man who'd helped me build the blind trust in the first place. My thumb hovered for only a second before pressing call. He answered on the second ring, his voice steady, clipped. "Michael, it's been a long time." "Too long," I said, my tone sharper than I expected. "I need everything opened. Audit, executive compensation, vendor contracts, the whole house. I want it on my desk before sunrise." Marcus paused, then replied in the same even tone. "So the king finally wants his crown back." "Yes," I said, "and it starts tonight." Marcus didn't need convincing. He'd always known the day might come when I'd step out of the shadows. "Send me access to the trust files," he said briskly. "I'll pull every record they've tried to bury." Within an hour, encrypted documents lit up my laptop screen. Expense reports, bonus packages, vendor lists. In the middle of a buried incident postmortem number 4732, one name kept repeating: Rachel Stone. At 2:13 a.m., she hot-patched a failing microservice and kept a 7-figure client online. The summary email, however, credited coordination to Ryan Pierce. I flagged it. I skimmed page after page, my pulse steady, colder with each line. Executive bonuses stacked higher than quarterly profits. Luxury client dinners in Las Vegas that read like personal vacations. Contracts steered to cousins and brothers-in-law. I pushed back from the desk, a slow smile cutting across my face. For years, they'd mistaken my silence for absence. They thought the hidden shareholder would never look under the rug as long as dividends rolled in. They were wrong. I typed a single line to Marcus. "Prepare the notice. Emergency board meeting. They'll know by morning who really owns them." A memory flickered. Last quarter's all hands. A demo on fire. Rachel's fingers flew over the terminal while Ryan narrated as if he were fixing it. Applause went to the voice, not the hands. For the first time in 15 years, the hunter's game was mine. The cursor blinked on a blank email, a small pulse of light in the darkened room. My fingers hovered over the keys, steady, deliberate. No need for long explanations. Power doesn't beg, it declares. Subject: Emergency board meeting. I typed each word with precision, attaching Marcus's preliminary audit report like a dagger slipped beneath their ribs. Effective immediately, a full review of executive conduct, compensation, and vendor contracts is required. Meeting to convene within 48 hours. At the bottom, I added the line they'd least expect. Notice from majority shareholder, Michael Carter. I hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving felt louder than a gunshot. Somewhere in the city, phones would buzz, screens would light up, and comfortable executives would sit bolt upright in their beds. For 15 years they had forgotten my name. By dawn, the whispers would spread through every corridor of Atlas Dynamics, and this time no one could laugh me out of the room. By morning, Marcus's full audit landed in my inbox, a hammer wrapped in paper. Page after page laid bare what I had suspected. Executive bonuses ballooning like golden parachutes, payouts larger than the profits they supposedly earned. Corporate credit cards bled with charges from Napa wine tours, Caribbean conferences, and designer boutiques filed under client relations. Worse still were the contracts, millions funneled to companies owned by cousins, brothers-in-law, even an old fraternity brother of Thomas Reed. Nepotism written in ink so sloppy it bordered on arrogance. They weren't even hiding it anymore. I scrolled, my jaw set, each line tightening the coil in my chest. This wasn't just greed, it was rot, and rot spreads until someone cuts it out. I leaned back in my chair, the city morning bleeding light through the blinds. For years they had laughed at the quiet man in the corner. Now those same men would explain, under oath, how they had turned Atlas into their personal playground. By mid-morning, the ripple turned into a wave. Word of the emergency meeting and the audit spread through Atlas Dynamics like fire on dry grass. 9:17 a.m., Engineering Bay C. A build pipeline stalled. A wall of red glared back at a nervous junior. Rachel slid onto a stool, traced the failure chain in seconds, and rolled a clean deploy. Ryan arrived with 2 managers in tow, clapped her shoulder like a TV host, and told the room, "See, this is how my team delivers." She didn't argue, just a tiny nod, and back to work. I made a note. Employees whispered in hallways, eyes flicking toward the executive floor where doors slammed more often than they opened. At 10 a.m., HR made its first move. Ryan Pierce's name echoed over the intercom, summoning him to human resources. The golden boy smirked as he strutted past the cubicles, still believing it was some routine formality. But behind the glass walls, heads turned, whispers sharpened. Everyone knew this was different. I watched from a quiet corner of the building, unseen but present, as 2 HR managers closed the door behind him. His grin faltered when he saw the folder waiting on the table, pages of contracts funneled to his cousin's construction company, signatures in his own hand. For the first time, Ryan's cocky confidence cracked. The predator who mocked me over champagne was about to learn what accountability tasted like. The meeting with HR didn't last long. Glass walls can't hide panic, and soon whispers rippled across the floor as voices behind the door rose sharp, then muffled, then final. 15 minutes later, the door opened. Ryan Pierce stepped out, his tie askew, the color drained from his smug face. The confident swagger he'd worn last night at the Petroleum Club was gone, replaced by stiff shoulders and darting eyes. 2 security officers flanked him, one carrying a small box stuffed hastily with personal items, a framed photo, a leather notebook, a few trinkets from his desk. Employees stopped pretending to work, their eyes following every step as Ryan was escorted down the corridor. No laughter now, no buddy talk, only the silence of a man who realized the joke had always been on him. From my vantage point in the shadows, I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply noted the sound of his footsteps fading, one predator removed, and more still to come. Not long after Ryan's exit, my phone buzzed. The sender, Thomas Reed. The subject line carried none of his usual bravado, just one word, concern. I opened it to find a wall of polished corporate language, his attempt at diplomacy. "Michael, I believe there's been some misunderstanding. These issues can be addressed in a less formal setting. Perhaps lunch, just the 2 of us, to clear the air. Atlas has always valued your contributions." The words reeked of fear. He hadn't called me a shareholder in years. Suddenly I was valued. I pictured him in his corner office, pacing with his tie loosened, trying to stitch together a net before the ground gave way. I typed my reply with the same steady precision I'd used the night before. No exceptions. All documents on my desk by 5 o'clock. Emergency board meeting proceeds as scheduled. I hit send. For the first time, Reed would learn what it felt like to answer, not command. My response was only a single line. 5 o'clock p.m. sharp. No delays. I hit send, and for a moment the silence of my office felt electric. That short sentence carried more weight than all of Reed's paragraphs combined. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an order. By noon, the ripple had become a storm. I could feel it in the building itself, hallways buzzing, conversations halting whenever I passed. Junior analysts whispered, "Who really owns this place?" while department heads huddled behind half-closed doors, their faces pale. The myth of the silent investor was unraveling in real time, and every employee wanted the truth. Reed, meanwhile, was drowning. His inbox overflowed with questions from the board, the press sniffed at rumors, and now his golden boy had been escorted out in front of everyone. But it wasn't just his reputation on the line anymore. It was his seat. And in less than 5 hours, he would have to face me, not as CEO, but as an employee answering to his boss. By early afternoon, Atlas Dynamics was no longer a workplace. It was a rumor mill on fire. I passed the glass-walled war room, sleeves rolled. Rachel coached a rookie through a rollback plan, patient, precise, invisible to the politics that filled the floor above. Competence doesn't shout, it ships. The hum of printers and keyboards had been replaced with low, urgent whispers that traveled faster than any email chain. In the cafeteria, analysts leaned across tables, murmuring, "Did you hear? The mystery investor. He's here." On the executive floor, assistants traded nervous glances as doors slammed shut and blinds were drawn. Some swore they saw Ryan escorted out with a cardboard box. Others claimed Thomas Reed was pacing his office, tie loose, face gray. Every conversation circled the same question: who actually runs this company? For 15 years, they thought the name Michael Carter meant nothing more than a retired husband trailing behind his wife at holiday parties. Now that name was being spoken with a different weight, half fear, half awe. I walked past them unnoticed, listening. The walls of Atlas had been built on arrogance and politics. Today, those walls were starting to crack. In the quiet of my office, away from the echo of rumors, I pulled out my phone and typed a short, deliberate message. "Rachel, the company needs you." I wasn't offering a favor. I was opening a door she'd already earned. Rachel Stone had been VP of Engineering for years, the kind of leader who built results in silence while others collected credit in boardrooms. I had watched her career from the shadows, her projects always on time, her teams fiercely loyal, her name rarely mentioned in glossy company newsletters. She wasn't connected enough, political enough, or ruthless enough to climb under Reed's regime. That made her perfect. Within minutes, her reply lit the screen. "Michael, I don't understand. Is this real?" I wrote back, "Real. Big changes are coming. Be ready." I could almost picture her at her cluttered desk, khakis and polo shirt, staring wide-eyed at the words. For the first time in years, she might have felt what I was feeling now. Momentum. The storm was coming, and Rachel would be part of rebuilding what Atlas was meant to be. Marcus arrived at my home office just after lunch, a slim leather briefcase in his hand and the kind of expression lawyers wear when history is about to be written. He laid the case on my desk, flipped the brass locks, and spread out a stack of documents with military precision. "These," he said, tapping the first packet, "are your rights as majority shareholder, voting control, veto authority, the works." Another stack slid forward. "Formal notice of takeover, effective the moment you sign." I ran my hand over the thick paper, embossed seals glinting under the desk lamp. 15 years of silence had come down to this moment. Ink on a page that would shift the ground beneath Atlas. Marcus studied me. "Once you file this, Reed is finished. There's no taking it back." I picked up the pen, rolling it between my fingers. My voice was calm, final. "Good." He had 15 years to prove himself. "Time's up." The pen hit the page. The coup had begun. The glass doors of Atlas Dynamics headquarters in Dallas parted with a hiss, and for the first time in 15 years, I didn't enter as anyone's guest. I walked in as the man who owned the building from the ground up. The lobby buzzed with the usual Monday chaos, phones ringing, interns clutching coffee trays, analysts rushing toward elevators. But the moment I stepped across the marble floor, the rhythm faltered. Eyes lifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Some recognized me vaguely, the husband who trailed along at company picnics. Others had only heard whispers that morning. The majority shareholder is here. Now they stared as if a ghost had stepped into daylight. I didn't hurry. Every stride was measured, echoing against the steel and glass, a reminder that silence can carry farther than noise. Behind the reception desk, an assistant froze with a pen in midair. My presence didn't need an announcement. The building already knew. This wasn't Reed's kingdom anymore. It was mine. The elevator chimed on the executive floor, doors sliding open to reveal Thomas Reed waiting just beyond the threshold. He stood stiff in his tailored suit, tie tugged too tight, the lines on his forehead deeper than I remembered. His hand shot out in greeting, but the gesture carried no conviction. "Michael," he said, voice brittle. "What a surprise." I accepted the handshake, his palm damp, grip trembling beneath the practiced smile. For 15 years, he had treated me like a silent investor tucked safely out of sight. Now the balance had shifted, and every ounce of his body knew it. "I don't believe in surprises, Thomas," I answered evenly, squeezing just enough to make him flinch. "I believe in accountability." His Adam's apple bobbed as he forced a nod, trying to shepherd me toward the boardroom with all the grace he could salvage. But the tremor in his hand betrayed him. He already knew this was the walk to his own gallows. The boardroom doors swung open, and the low murmur of voices cut off as I stepped inside. A mahogany table stretched across the room, polished to a mirror sheen, surrounded by men and women in tailored suits who looked up with a mix of irritation and curiosity. They expected Thomas Reed to preside. Instead, they saw me. I didn't wait for Reed's introduction. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, let the silence stretch a beat, then spoke clearly, each word deliberate. "My name is Michael Carter, founder of Orion Systems." The shift was immediate. Brows furrowed, whispers rippled, and one board member, Patricia Hensley, the only woman at the table, leaned forward, eyes narrowing with sudden recognition. "As in, the Orion Systems merger?" she asked. "The very same," I said, placing Marcus's audit reports on the table like a dealer laying down a royal flush. "And today, you'll learn what that merger really meant." The room went utterly still. I slid the thick stack of audit reports across the polished mahogany, the pages fanning out like a verdict. Numbers, signatures, vendor lists, all black and white, undeniable. The air in the boardroom shifted. The hum of the HVAC seemed louder than breath. No one reached for the papers at first. They just stared at them as though the ink might burn their hands. Finally, Patricia Hensley drew one page closer, her eyes scanning line after line. Her lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tightening. Across from her, Robert Chin cleared his throat, but the sound cracked halfway, betraying nerves. The rest sat frozen, the weight of silence heavy enough to bend the table itself. Thomas Reed shifted in his chair, sweat beading along his temple, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. Every page on that table was a nail in his coffin. I leaned back, folding my hands. "So," I said evenly, "shall we continue pretending, or shall we face the truth?" I let the silence drag just long enough for their discomfort to settle in, then pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. The heading at the top read in bold, "Notice of Resignation, Thomas Reed." "I won't waste your time," I said, my voice calm, cutting through the stillness. "Effective immediately, Thomas Reed's resignation is accepted. Security will escort him from the premises by the end of the day. Pursuant to the bylaws and the voting rights under the blind trust, this resolution takes effect immediately." A ripple of shock passed through the board. Sharp inhales, exchanged glances, the scrape of a pen dropped against wood. Reed shot to his feet, face flushed crimson. "You can't," he started, but his voice cracked. "I own 90% of this company," I interrupted, steel in every syllable. "I don't ask, I decide." Reed's mouth opened, then closed. The fight drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. For the first time in 15 years, Thomas Reed had nothing left to say. The king had been dethroned. I let Reed sink back into his chair, the weight of silence pressing down on him, then slid a second folder across the table. This one bore a single name on the tab, Ryan Pierce. "Effective immediately," I said, my tone flat and final. "Ryan Pierce's contract with Atlas Dynamics is terminated. His conduct, both inside and outside this company, has been documented. The evidence is here: nepotism, conflicts of interest, abuse of resources." A few board members shifted uncomfortably, as though remembering the jokes Ryan had made at the Petroleum Club. They weren't laughing now. Patricia Hensley adjusted her glasses, scanning the first page, then looked up and gave a sharp nod. Robert Chin avoided my eyes, but he didn't object. No one did. "Consider this a warning," I continued, letting my gaze sweep the room. "Atlas is done rewarding arrogance in politics. From this moment on, merit will rule, not connections, not cocktails." The message was clear. Ryan was only the first. For a long moment, the boardroom felt frozen. Papers lay untouched in the center of the table. Reed slumped in his chair like a man already erased, and the others sat stiff as statues. I could hear the faint buzz of a light fixture overhead, louder than the men and women who claimed to govern this company. Patricia Hensley moved first. She picked up the pen, adjusted her glasses, and with a steady hand, signed her name beneath the resolution. The sharp scratch of ink seemed to unlock the others. One by one, they leaned forward. Robert Chin, face pale. Douglas Grant, lips pressed tight. Marianne Keller, exhaling hard before scribbling her name. When the last pen left paper, the board sat back, stunned, as though realizing they'd just shifted the axis of Atlas dynamics. Pursuant to the bylaws and the voting rights under the trust, the resolutions, once fully executed, take effect immediately. I gathered the signed documents, stacked them neatly, and slid them into my folder. "Good," I said quietly. "Now this company finally belongs to the people who built it." I rose from my chair, the signed papers tucked neatly under my hand, and let my gaze travel around the table. Their faces were still drawn tight, wary, waiting for the axe to fall again. Instead, I laid down a fresh page, one name written across the top in bold: Rachel Stone. "I'm nominating Rachel Stone as the new CEO of Atlas Dynamics," I said. My voice was steady, certain. The reaction was immediate. Eyebrows arched, chairs creaked as members leaned forward. Robert Chin scoffed, unable to hide it. "Stone? She's an engineer. She's never sat in this room, never run an executive team." I didn't blink. "Exactly. She spent years in the trenches, delivering results while others played politics. She understands the company from the ground up, and unlike Reed or Pierce, she doesn't need a cocktail glass to prove her worth." Silence followed. Patricia Hensley folded her hands, studying me, then gave a small nod. The tide was turning. The board erupted in murmurs, the polished calm of the room fracturing into sharp whispers. Robert Chin shook his head, muttering about lack of executive experience, while Douglas Grant rubbed his temples as though the idea itself gave him a headache. For a moment, it felt like the old guard might cling to their safe, rotten comfort. Then Patricia Hensley spoke, her voice low but firm. "We've spent 15 years rewarding politics over performance. Look where that got us. Corruption, complacency, chaos. Maybe it's time we give competence a chance." The room quieted. Eyes darted from one to another, the weight of her words sinking in. One by one, heads began to nod. Even Robert, red-faced and reluctant, finally muttered, "Fine, let's vote." When the hands rose, none stayed down. Unanimous. Rachel Stone, once overlooked, always underestimated, was now CEO of Atlas Dynamics. Pursuant to the bylaws and the voting rights under the trust, the appointment takes immediate effect. The legal department will file the notice of change in title in accordance with applicable regulations. I leaned back, letting the silence return. For the first time all day, it wasn't heavy. It was promising. The boardroom doors opened with a soft click, and in walked Rachel Stone, khakis, company polo, hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun. No designer suit, no polished cufflinks, no perfume of power. Just the quiet confidence of a woman who'd spent her career fixing problems instead of creating them. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around her. The board members, still wrapped in silk ties and tailored jackets, shifted uncomfortably as her eyes swept across the table. Clear, sharp, unflinching. She didn't belong in their world of polished lies, and that was exactly why she belonged here now. Rachel stopped at my side, folding her hands in front of her. I caught the flicker in her gaze. Nerves, pride, disbelief all tangled together. "Rachel," I said, my voice cutting the tension, "meet your board. They've just voted. You're the new CEO of Atlas Dynamics." The silence that followed wasn't doubt this time. It was the weight of history tilting on its axis. Rachel's lips parted, but before she could speak, I laid a steady hand on the table and leaned forward. My voice carried, calm but unyielding. "Rachel, Atlas doesn't need another politician in a suit. It needs meritocracy. From this day forward, promotions are earned by results, not cocktails or connections. Open doors, open books, no more shadows." Her eyes widened, the weight of the charge settling in, then steadied with a spark I had seen in her work, but never in this room. She gave a firm nod. Patricia Hensley exhaled, relief softening her posture. A few others shifted uncomfortably, but none dared object. They'd seen too clearly what silence had cost them. Rachel placed both palms on the table, her voice steady. "Then that's the company I'll run. one where the hardest workers rise and the dead weight doesn't get to hide. For the first time in years, I felt Atlas breathe. Not decay, not arrogance, but possibility. The boardroom door shut behind me with a soft click, sealing in the stunned silence. The hallway stretched long and bright, sunlight cutting through the glass panels in clean lines across the carpet. And there she was, Lauren. She stood a few feet away, arms folded tight against her emerald blouse, her heels anchored to the spot. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her eyes, once polished and dismissive in crowded ballrooms, now carried something I hadn't seen in years. Not contempt, not amusement. Something closer to unease, maybe even respect. "Michael," she whispered, the word fragile in the open space. Her gaze darted past me, toward the boardroom doors, then back to my face as if searching for the man she'd laughed at only nights ago. I didn't stop walking. I met her stare, let the silence stretch heavy, then moved past her. For once, it was she who turned to follow me with her eyes, not the other way around. The house was quiet when we walked in, but silence never lasts. Lauren barely made it past the doorway before she spun on me, voice sharp enough to rattle the picture frames. "You embarrassed me," she shouted, pacing the living room like a storm bottled in heels. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Everyone at work is talking about how I didn't even know who my own husband was." I slipped off my jacket, hung it neatly on the chair, and loosened my tie, my movements calm, deliberate, in stark contrast to her fury. "Which one bothers you more?" I asked evenly. "That they were laughing at me, or that now they're laughing at you?" Her eyes flashed, mascara already smudged from the day before. "Don't you dare turn this around. I've spent years building my reputation, and you just destroyed it all in one night." I leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "No, Lauren, I didn't destroy anything. I revealed the truth." Her eyes widened, disbelief freezing her mid-step. The air felt thick, almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. What?" Lauren stammered, trying to mask the tremor in her voice with a sharp laugh that failed. "I said it clearly," I repeated, voice calm, steady. "You laughed, right there, when they called me a loser." Her face went pale, mascara streaks down her cheeks like war paint of regret. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Words failed her. You actually heard me?" she finally whispered, almost a plea. "Yes," I said, stepping closer, letting the silence stretch. "And now, I need you to hear this too. That night, in front of everyone, I let it go. But the truth doesn't get ignored." Her hands trembled at her sides. The fight drained from her posture. For the first time, the illusion of control she'd worn so long began to crumble. Lauren's composure shattered like glass under a hammer. She sank onto the edge of the couch, shoulders trembling. "Michael, I didn't know." Her voice cracked, raw and ragged. Tears streaked her cheeks, mascara smudged in chaotic rivers. I stopped a few feet away, watching her, feeling the weight of years condensed into this moment. I didn't soften. I didn't step closer. "You didn't want to know," I said slowly, each word measured, deliberate. "Not really. You chose the laughter. You chose the company of people who humiliated me, and tonight you're realizing it doesn't end with a laugh." Her hands clawed at her face. Sobs tore from her chest, jagged and desperate. I turned, smooth and silent, as if leaving a shadow behind instead of a man. My jacket whispered against the floor. My shoes tapped a cold rhythm on the hardwood. She called after me, voice raw, pleading. But I kept walking, quiet, resolute, unmoved. I walked back into the office, the glass doors swinging behind me like a seal shutting on the night. The city lights from the Dallas skyline scattered across my desk, cold, indifferent. I didn't speak. I didn't call anyone. I just dropped my jacket, letting it slump over the chair, and sank into the leather like it could bear the weight my chest couldn't. Exhaustion pulsed through me, slow and relentless. Every laugh in that ballroom, every mocking word, every smirk from Ryan Pierce and the board, it all played on a loop behind my eyes. My hands rested on the polished wood, shaking slightly, though I didn't move. Silence filled the room, heavy and absolute. The hum of the AC, the faint click of my watch, the distant sirens outside, it was all I had. I closed my eyes, let the tension stretch, let it settle. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But for now, I allowed myself a single thing: the quiet. The next morning, I walked into Atlas Dynamics headquarters in Dallas again, but it felt different. The air wasn't thick with whispers or smirks. The hallways were alive with purposeful footsteps, not gossip. Rachel had done it. She'd opened the doors. Meritocracy wasn't just a word on a slide anymore. Teams gathered around whiteboards, ideas bouncing freely. HR had rolled out new policies overnight. Transparency, accountability, rewards tied to real performance, not who you knew. I paused in the lobby, watching employees exchange nods, smiles, even laughter. It was strange, liberating. Atlas was no longer a fortress of favoritism. It was becoming a machine that ran on competence, not politics. I overheard a manager briefing her team. Innovation wins here, no exceptions. A shiver ran through me, not from doubt, but satisfaction. I leaned against the glass wall, the Dallas sun catching my face, and let myself believe it. The company I'd saved 15 years ago, the one I'd fought to reclaim, was finally moving in the right direction, and this time, it was unstoppable. By midweek, Atlas felt like an entirely new company. Rachel moved through the floor with quiet authority, nodding at junior analysts, congratulating interns, acknowledging every team member's work. I watched her in the main office, assigning leadership roles not by tenure or connections, but by talent and results. The woman who had once seemed like a distant figurehead was now a force. People leaned in to hear her, respected her, and, most importantly, trusted her judgment. A young programmer, barely out of college, got promoted to lead a critical project. Another, a single mom with years of overlooked experience, was handed a team for the first time. Rachel smiled, encouraging them, her energy contagious. I realized then that Atlas wasn't just my 90% anymore. It belonged to every employee who earned it. The walls of greed and favoritism had been torn down. For the first time in years, I felt proud without a trace of bitterness. The company I reclaimed was no longer about revenge. It was about justice, opportunity, and real leadership. By Friday, the old cliques and backroom politics were gone. Whispered alliances, the secret lunch tables, the favors traded over bottles of whiskey, all dissolved under Rachel's watchful eye. I walked the corridors of Atlas Dynamics headquarters in Dallas, noticing the shift. Teams once fractured by favoritism now collaborated, sharing ideas openly, debating fiercely but respectfully. The energy was tangible, almost electric, a hum of productivity replacing the low buzz of resentment. Even Lauren had to notice. She lingered at the edge of a hallway, watching a formerly sidelined analyst present a bold proposal directly to Rachel. No one interrupted, no one mocked. The analyst's confidence grew with each nod from Rachel. I felt a quiet satisfaction. This was the Atlas I had envisioned when I first reclaimed it. Not a battlefield of personalities and agendas, but a company where merit mattered, where talent was recognized, and where petty grudges held no weight. Somewhere in the corner of my mind, I wondered if Lauren would ever see that this power, this authority, came from substance, not manipulation. By Monday, the phones were ringing again. Long, silent clients, who had once doubted Atlas under Reed's reign, were calling back, eager to meet, to renegotiate, to trust. Emails poured in. We hear the leadership is changing. We want to resume business. Contracts that had stalled for months were signed within hours. Even competitors paused, sensing the shift. Rachel handled the calls with calm authority, her voice steady, confident. I watched from the glass-walled corner office, noticing her poise, the way clients responded, not out of fear or obligation, but respect. Atlas was no longer a company built on politics. It was built on results, reliability, and merit. The buzz in the office changed too. Staff smiled as they picked up calls, presenting proposals with renewed energy. Teams huddled over strategies, not gossip. And in that moment, I realized, reclaiming Atlas wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoring faith. Faith from employees, from clients, from the market. Even Lauren had to admit it, though she wouldn't say it aloud. Lauren lingered near the glass wall, watching. Not a word, not a glance my way, just eyes wide, jaw tight. The laughter, the respect, the energy of Atlas returning, it all hit her at once. She had thought she'd humiliated me, made me the punchline at that ballroom, at every cocktail party, in every whispered office hallway. And now, she was invisible, not just to me, but to the pulse of the company she had once cared about. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she left, a shadow passing through the returning sunlight. I didn't follow. I didn't gloat. That satisfaction wasn't mine to claim. In her silence, I saw regret sharper than any words, a recognition that the world had shifted, and she had misjudged everything. The company, me, the quiet strength I had carried while she laughed. And for the first time, I let myself feel it, the calm power of being right and of leaving her to reckon with her own choices. The morning sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Atlas Dynamics headquarters in Dallas. I stood by my desk, sipping bitter coffee, watching the first real wave of employees move with purpose, their chatter lighter, more confident. The company was waking up. But I didn't stop there. I drafted the paperwork for the Jack Morgan Foundation Scholarship, a program dedicated to children of hardworking Atlas families, those who couldn't afford the education they deserved. It was a promise that talent and grit mattered more than pedigree or office politics. Rachel looked over my shoulder, raising an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in her eyes. I didn't explain everything. Some things were meant to speak louder than words. Emails were sent, the website launched, and the first applications already started pouring in. I felt the weight of past years lifting, not from vengeance, but from creating something enduring. Atlas could thrive, and now, a new generation could rise with it. This was quiet power. This was legacy. 3 months later, the familiar hum of the Dallas Petroleum Club greeted me. Polished marble floors, the low chatter of men in tailored suits, and the scent of aged whiskey mingling with expensive cologne. I walked in, shoulders squared, the memory of that night still sharp but distant. Lauren was there. Same laughter, same glittering dress. But this time it felt hollow. She spotted me, hesitation flickering in her eyes. I gave a small nod, polite, almost casual. She flinched. The room seemed different. I wasn't invisible anymore. Employees, investors, even a few old acquaintances recognized the quiet authority I now carried. Whispered conversations paused as I passed, a ripple of acknowledgement trailing behind me. I let the moment linger. No words, no confrontation, just presence. I sipped my whiskey, bitter, precise, savoring the quiet vindication. The loser label had evaporated. I was Michael Carter, Atlas majority owner, founder of a scholarship, a man who had rebuilt more than a company. Some lessons were best served in silence. I stepped onto the small stage near the ballroom's corner, an informal toast to Atlas's turnaround. The lights glinted off polished surfaces, reflecting the quiet anticipation in the room. This time, when I spoke, the applause was warm, genuine. No snickers, no mocking whispers. Each clap felt measured, deliberate, a subtle acknowledgement that the tide had shifted. Faces that once smirked now nodded respectfully. Even the bartenders paused, glasses in hand, to witness the moment. Lauren stood at the edge of the room, frozen, eyes wide, her hand gripping a flute of champagne. She had no laughter left, only a realization creeping in. The tables had turned. I let the moment stretch, savoring the silence that replaced mockery. No gloating, no vindictive words, just authority. The weight on my shoulders felt lighter. Atlas was no longer the playground of fools. It belonged to those who built it. And tonight, everyone knew exactly who that was. The room, the people, the energy, it all affirmed it. I was no longer invisible. Rachel stepped forward, her presence confident yet warm. The room's chatter dimmed instinctively as she raised her glass, her eyes briefly meeting mine. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice steady, commanding attention without a hint of arrogance. "It's my honor to introduce someone who rebuilt more than a company. Someone whose vision, integrity, and quiet strength remind us what leadership really means." All eyes turned to me. My pulse quickened, but I kept my posture relaxed, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. I let her words hang, letting the weight of each syllable settle over the room. "Michael Carter," she concluded, and the applause rippled out. Not the cautious claps of curiosity, not the hollow laughs of doubt. It was full, genuine, warm, respect, acknowledgement, and perhaps a touch of awe. I nodded slightly, a reserved smile touching my lips. No words were needed. Rachel's introduction said it all. The room now saw me as I had always been, not the man they thought they knew. I stepped forward, feeling the soft buzz of the ballroom lights above and the collective gaze of colleagues, clients, and former rivals. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting it carry weight. Every heartbeat in that room seemed audible. Then I spoke, voice calm, deliberate. "The sweetest revenge," I began, letting my words linger, "isn't destruction, it's rebuilding." I let my eyes sweep across the room, catching glimmers of recognition, surprise, and a few humbled nods. It's in creating something stronger, fairer, better, not tearing down someone else to prove a point. I felt the warmth of genuine applause begin, this time free of judgment or schadenfreude. Glasses clinked, whispers of agreement spread. I took a breath, letting it soak in, the quiet vindication of truth, integrity, and patience. No more shortcuts, no more favoritism. Merit, diligence, and respect will lead Atlas from this day forward, I said. Each word landed like bricks, building a foundation far sturdier than any temporary humiliation. I let my gaze drift naturally across the room, scanning familiar faces, friends, clients, even the few who had doubted me. And then I saw her. Lauren, sitting in the third row, her posture stiff yet attentive, her eyes no longer mocking, but searching. Searching for what, I couldn't tell exactly, but the shift was undeniable. Her lips were pressed together, mascara slightly smudged from earlier emotions, yet her eyes held something I hadn't seen in years: respect. And behind it, a quiet tinge of regret, the weight of understanding finally settling in. The woman who had laughed at my name, at my perceived failures, now bore witness to the truth I had quietly built, piece by piece. I didn't look away, nor did I offer a nod or a smile. I simply let her see. And in that glance, I felt the subtle, powerful satisfaction of patience, of resilience, of having held my ground when it mattered most. I set the mic down and let the room breathe. Same chandeliers, same polished marble, but not the same man. On the night they laughed, I stayed silent. The night I stood up, I took back my name. The sweetest revenge isn't destruction, it's rebuilding. Respect isn't handed out, it's claimed, brick by brick, choice by choice. Atlas stands different now. Open doors, earned promotions, clients returning because we keep our word. A scholarship with my family name will outlive any headline. Rachel runs this place with steadiness that doesn't need a spotlight. And Lauren, in the third row, she finally sees what silence was building the whole time. Maybe respect, maybe regret. That's her story to finish. Mine is simpler. I'm done being invisible. I'll keep showing up, doing the work, and letting results speak louder than a ballroom full of laughter. If you were in my shoes, would you stay quiet or stand up? Type respect in the comments and subscribe to see what comes next.